mean, there was a couple really fruitful years where things were still, like, as I perceive it, like colorful. Like that first Lollapalooza lineup sort of speaks to how colorful it was. Like Siouxsie and the Banshees, Butthole Surfers, Body Count, Janes. And then yeah, it's sort of, I would say, like after Kurt's death, that seems to be where things funneled into a more narrow, more sort of like macho rock thing, especially on the radio in the mainstream.
Hey, welcome to Feedback Def. I'm Sabby RK, the apostate music journalist. I'm very excited to present this interview with Jordon Zadarozny. Zadarozny is the mastermind behind Blinker the Star, which I guess you could describe as an alternative rock band / solo vehicle at this point, but I don't know that that's really the most accurate way to describe what Jordon has done since the mid-90s. Listen. One thing, I made the most epic Blinker the Star playlist on Spotify. It is so epic that there's the like full length 2-hour version, and there's I broke it up into 2 parts. Man, oh man, oh man. There is nothing I like doing more in a professional / creative sense than constructing sequences of songs. And this is like, this playlist is like fucking Monolith from Arthur C. Clarke, and like we are all, apes, hunched around the awesome power of the playlist as a thing. That's how excited I am about it. I know that probably doesn't make any sense, but this body of work that Jordon Zadarozny has created, I feel like this is the ultimate journey through that body of work. It's linked in the description. Please check it out. I mean, I don't even care about like Spotify followers and anything like that. That doesn't really help the channel at all for you to go. I want this for you to hear this. If you have any interest in Blinker the Star at all, kick back, get those headphones or whatever on, or sit back in the stereo, and you are in for a ride. So please do check it out. Quick history lesson: Zadarozny is from a small town / farming community named Pembroke in the Canadian province of Ontario. Pembroke is about 90 miles from Ottawa. Grew up there, went to university in Montreal, where he met Melissa Oftmar, who would go on to play with Hole and Smashing Pumpkins, etc. Signs to A&M Records while still based out of Ontario, and then eventually finds his way to LA, where he is then, in his own words, sort of adopted by musicians like Ken Andrews of Failure, Brad Lehner of the band Medicine, Paul D'Amour, the founding bass player of Tool, and Chris Pittman, who played with D'Amour and Greg Edwards from Failure and Ken Andrews as well. Spends several years in LA, puts out a total of 4 records under the Blinker the Star name, where the first album is just sort of him playing all the instruments. He was a prodigy who would like start, his parents owned a music store, which was like right out with like the Trans-Canada Highway, like right behind the store. Really cool story. And started playing music instruments early and recording himself. So that first Blinker the Star record is mostly him. Then the project develops into more of a band that's more in sort of the alternative rock mold. And then eventually with the third Blinker the Star album, 1999's August Everywhere, Ken Andrews of Failure takes the helm as producer. Now, Zadarozny and Andrews are what I like to describe as like musical separated at birth twins. So there's so much about their sensibility that overlaps and also interlocks in this beautiful way. And you really hear it on that record. It's 1999, so it's like the grunge thing is kind of in the rearview mirror, at least in terms of like mainstream perception. And you're really getting this sense that although it very much fits the sort of alt guitar rock kind of mold, Zadorozny and Andrews, along with Kelly Scott from Failure on drums. At this point, Failure had broken up, and so Andrews is producing and Kelly Scott's on drums. Together they're stretching past that paradigm quite a bit, and there's a real Elton John orchestrated pop influence and grandeur to that album. So even though if you like bands like Stone Temple Pilots and Smashing Pumpkins and Nirvana and all those other, like very visible alt rock like household names, Soundgarden, etc., this album would very much be in your wheelhouse, but it's more leaning towards like a 70s, not so much in tone, but in scope, right? It has just as much in common with like classic Elton John as it does with STP. And that's what I find so magical, me personally, about that record. You may know that album already from the video for the single Below Sliding Doors, but that's just like a sliver of that's just like one serving of what's on there. It's a really it's a very hearty, full experience to sit down and listen to that album. So the band goes on and records one more record in 2003 and then break up. Zadorozny revives Blinker the Star in 2012, but it really isn't until 2017 where he hits this kind of creative stride. He's done just about a record a year since then. So he's on his 6th album since 2017. He's now back in Pembroke, has been for a few years now, and boy, the output that his recent output really shows you that the whole alternative rock thing didn't have to dissolve. That these trends kind of come and go, but that has more to do with trends and the nature of what we think of as fashionable than it actually has anything to do with music. You listen to his current body of work, and he really exemplifies how all of those bands from that period could have continued evolving and done really interesting stuff. Now, he has always done things with his own twist. August Everywhere very much has this kind of odd, like his fingerprints are all over it, and his like approach is very distinctive, kind of angular. He told me, I interviewed him in 2020 for Pop Matters, and at that time his most recent record was Juvenile Universe, and he told me that he grew up very much like not having this like tribalistic music experience. Like he and his friends didn't think that you had to be like a loyalist for one camp of music, and that very much shows in his style and his approach. He draws very freely. He's been moving more and more towards this like poppy Cars singer-songwriter kind of thing, but even then that doesn't really sum up what he's doing lately, and it doesn't even really sum up where he's been. It's just he's very much got his own stamp. And so as he moves through these other influences, and as you hear this kind of very familiar, like, oh yeah, that sounds like sort of post-alternative rock. Like that sounds like an alt-rock artist who has matured into this like more adult-sounding music. Even though that's like the immediate sense you get, there's still something very distinct to him. He's a real studio rat, as it were. He's like super into recording and production. And the new album actually features Paul D'Amour quite a bit. I want to read to you a note that Zadorozny sent describing the album, like a quick note just to give me a reference when he first was sending it out to press. So Zadorozny writes, "The thing that I'm enjoying the most these days is sort of creating a band for each new album." So it's like a different like cluster of people, and that while he's working on a particular record becomes sort of the band for that record. So this is somebody that's like always recording. Since interviewing him in 2020, whenever I've emailed to check in on like, hey, what are you working on lately? What do you got on the slate? Every single time you speak with him, like I spoke with him and his new album, Animal Math. I always want to say Animal Magic. The new album, Animal Magic, was done, and he was already onto working on new stuff, which you'll hear more about in this note. He has been finding that each of these projects, like initially they were sort of bleeding one into the other, but they're now starting to really take their own form and their own identity, their own personality. So he continues. For Animal Math, alt-rock couple Paul D'Amour of Tool, Ministry, and Lusk, and his life partner Gildan Turnador of Fig played a leading role. Paul added spectral splashes of guitar, and Gildan brought an ethereal shimmer to her vocal parts. Alan Epley, frontman of Shiner and The Life and Times, also makes an appearance co-writing and singing lead on Throwing Dice, a collaboration born out of working together on a Vast Robot Armies album and a hang session in Toronto after a Shiner gig. Overall, a looser, more let's go with the first take ethos started to take over the sessions, which led to some of the more sprawling, guitar-centered moments on the record. Closing track, Sweet Teeth, was composed entirely of improvised first takes on a variety of instruments until a complete song structure fell into place. This album represents a more gut-oriented, less predetermined approach to record making. I'm feeling like going even a bit further in this direction on the next album, already in progress, of course. So there you have it. I'm not going to say too much about this album because he and I discussed it, but it's really exciting, the new direction that Zadar Razny's going in, and it's also really, really exciting that Paul D'Amour has resurfaced in a way. He has been active since leaving Tool. He was doing soundtracks. Now he's in Ministry. But this is more of the flavor we got from D'Amour with the Lusk album, which happens to be one of my favorite albums ever, one of my Desert Island discs, which Zadar Razny and I discuss. And it's very, very cool to see Blinker the Star sort of taking on a new shape with each record. So, without further ado, I give you Jordon Zadar Razny of Blinker the Star.
There we go.
Hello.
Yeah.
Got it. Gotcha. Hello, sir.
Cheers. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I love how you're sitting down with a mug of something, and it's like so perfect for right now.
Yeah, it's great. I'm in the control room here in the studio, so I've got the drum kit cramped in here and various guitars, amps, and gear. So this is like the sort of the mothership.
I love the lights, by the way.
Totally necessary, especially this time of year, living 6 months in this latitude, so dark, so early, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, I need a little bit of artificial light sweetening somehow. Feels better.
So I'm not sure when Canada falls back from daylight savings, but we just move the clocks here. It sounds like you're still adjusting and still really impressed by the climate and the like, just sort of the landscape of where you're from, having been in LA all those years.
Yeah, so living like almost literally in the middle of a cornfield, you definitely find yourself paying attention to nature way more. And I saw this interview with Robert Plant. It was like either during or just after COVID time, and someone asked him how he's doing, and he was like, well, I've formed personal relationships with my trees on my property. And I was like, me too. So yeah, it plays into my mood and stuff, and like whether I can, get moving on something or decide to delay it and go for a walk and sort of, get some sun on my face before I go back into, you know, the dungeon again, because it can get, just I'm naturally okay in the darkness and stuff, but I notice it after a certain number of days if I just don't get out of here and tune into what's outside, that yeah, it just doesn't sit well with human beings. I think, like, I actually force myself once in a while. Like, the way it works in my life is I have the kids here for a week and then they go to their moms for a week, so I have these open weeks where I if there's not a lot of mixing or working with other artists, I'm really kind of just following my own whims. And at that point, if I spend too much time inside, I will I'll force myself to go to Boston Pizza, sit on the bar side, and have chicken wings and a glass of wine just to talk to anyone or overhear normal human conversation. And it recontextualizes me in my place and time, because it can just get a little spacey in here, obviously, which is good. But then too much of it is just, it can mess with your energy and, make you sleepy and stuff.
Totally. No, I that makes perfect sense. And you hear about these classic records like, I don't know, Exile on Main Street comes to mind, where Keith Richards talks about spending 4 days awake or something, doing speedballs mostly by himself, playing a bass part, you know, because Bill Wyman wasn't there for, and it just, after a while, you just can't do things. Your constitution just won't tolerate something like that.
No, and that's why they only did one album like that. Like, there's no way that can be you can get through it once because you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but you're not going back in there again. You're not going to go into those rusty basements and live that existence and, wait for Keith to wake up or wait for Bill to wake up, or, all
Or
that
for that matter, Greg Edwards. Which is not a dig on Greg, obviously, but
yeah, he's napping. So
I think they had windows in that place, but it looked pretty dreary. It looked like three young men who did not prioritize sunlight very much.
no, that was definitely not the priority. And I'm sure that they can kind of tell you similar stories. It's funny though, because Ken and Greg are naturally sort of athletic, sporty dudes, which is interesting. When I first questioned Ken about like their relationship, he was like, it was forged on like hiking and tennis and stuff. And I was like, whoa, that's so weird from, the sort of the druggy haze of making Fantastic Planet and the stories from that record. I was like, interesting. So, now that they're both healthy, I think they kind of do occasionally do those things again.
Well, that's funny because Ken didn't mention that he's athletic. He mentioned to me that Greg is deep into running now.
Yeah.
He
I
told
run
me a
as well,
story.
but Greg is way more sort of like, like timing himself and all that.
He told me a really funny story. He said they played down south somewhere and it was like, over 100 degrees, and he said people were like complaining just going from the bus to the venue because the heat was so oppressive. And he saw Greg suiting up to run and he's like, okay, just don't die.
Yeah, no, I relate to that. It's like I'm out there in a skidoo suit running in the winter. Like, I have to do it. I get it. Yeah, it was fun because Ken was up here a year ago and we filmed a lot of our conversations for the doc. Like, he had tried to get someone else to interview him, and he found that I think that he was a bit stiff, and he wanted someone that had some history with him, but someone that's a little bit removed. And so I came to mind, and so he came up here. It was about exactly a year ago, and it was really crazy. He he's I thought he'd want to stay in a motel or something because I live in the studio. There's not a lot of room. There's not extra bedrooms and stuff. So he was like, no, I want the full Skylark Park experience. So I gave him the bedroom. I slept on the couch, which is great because I usually fall asleep there anyway. And I guess we hadn't seen each other since we were trying to figure it out, but maybe like 2011. So it'd been like 10 years plus. And I picked him up at the airport and we just started talking, and he stayed for 4 days, and we didn't stop talking until I dropped him off at the airport. And it was just a matter of, let's move our bodies somewhere else so we can get another shot while this conversation continues. Like there was no need for any sort of, Ken had sort of a loose, he knew kind of what he wanted to get out of me and the discussions, just in a loose sense, but they went, off the rails in the best possible way. It was really good.
So how much was talking a part of your relationship with any of these folks back in?
Sorry, go ahead.
Back in the 90s when you were around them in their orbit.
Well, Ken and
I were all in the same orbit.
Yeah. Ken and I had it's easier to look back now when after you have many other personal relationships to compare it to. But with Ken, when I think of it now, I mean, we were not only had like a very specific mutual set of interests that we could, and also that we could both sort of teach each other stuff about, bands or music or books, movies that the other hadn't heard of, just slightly outside of those taste parameters. But he and I were both just sort of fascinated with each other's brains is a big part of it. And what was blindingly obvious when he was here was that fascination continues completely unabated since those days. And of course, now older and both of us with kids and, exes to sort of like, solidify the things that we have in common. It was such a great exchange. Not only for his film, I'm sure it's going to be great. I haven't seen anything from it, but I just know from the conversations that he got some good stuff about himself. So it was not only good for the film, but it was really good for our friendship, and fun. It was so fun.
And also that sensation of picking up with someone, the proverbial picking up right where you left off kind of a thing, where the relationship itself, the synergy just has a life of its own that doesn't go anywhere. It stays alive. And that's a really incredible feeling that, anybody can relate to when you have that kind of connection with someone. It's really, incredible how much the focus for those guys has shifted not only to making new, fresh, contemporary music, but also to being really introspective.
Mm-hmm.
And the personal journey and discovering oneself through the work one made and has continued to make I think is an undercurrent of everything they've done since getting back together. And that I'm curious with you as well, because this is your third album since the last time we spoke, right around Juvenile Universe.
Mm-hmm.
So you've put out about one a year.
Mm-hmm.
Arista, Love Oblast, if I'm pronouncing it right, and now Animal Magic.
Mm-hmm.
Am I skipping one? No, I don't think I am.
Let's see. There's Careful with Your Magic, Juvenile Universe, the covers album, Love Oblast and now Animal Math. Yeah.
Okay. Animal Math, excuse me. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, animal logic and animal math combined to
Wasn't that a Stewart Copeland band?
yes, Stewart Copeland and I believe Stanley Clark, if I'm not mistaken.
And then they had an Australian singer, I think, right?
That's right.
A woman. And oh yeah, I was thinking about that recently. That I'm just curious to hear it again because I can't even remember what it sounded like. I think it was a pop record, but
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I
interesting.
just yeah, right. So
That was quick rattling in the very, very back of my mind because I remembered paying attention to that when it came out because I was really curious what Stuart Copeland was doing.
yes, and I wish he'd kept up with I had a lot to say about his newer orchestral treatments of the Police, and because I just discovered the Rhythmatist. The Police are one of my favorite bands,
Oh,
and
yeah.
he's one of my favorite drummers, but I had never listened to the Rhythmatist, and it just blew me away how fucking incredible it is.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I just wish there was more of this kind of thing from this guy, like all along. But I'm really stoked to have fallen into that recently. It's like it's hitting me like it was like a new release or something. It's like,
That's
wow.
fun. Yeah, that's fun. I'm gonna throw it on. I do have it on vinyl over in the corner there. Yeah, I can go on a little Stewart binge after this. Thank
Awesome,
you.
awesome. Sure, sure. So there's a few things here. I am curious for you to look at like now surveying where you are now because you seem like you're on this really steady clip,
Yeah.
making things.
Mhm.
How do you think your lyrics and the things that you're concerned about or thinking about that are funneling into the music have grown now that you're looking back at your whole body of work?
Yeah, I think they're becoming more symbolic, if that's possible, in that I'm just because of the books I'm reading and living out here in this more sort of, you know, elemental milieu, that though these sort of symbols of nature and stuff are the things that are just at hand in front of me and are very easy to reference and to use as analogies and stuff like that. So I think like certainly on this record, I feel just like the perspective has changed a little bit. It's a little difficult for me to completely parse because I finished it, 2 weeks ago. But I feel like I don't know, just like ingesting so much Joseph Campbell or something. I'm not sure what it is. They're becoming just sort of more of these sort of symbolically rich things in the lyrics. I mean, the music's a whole other story, but lyrically, I think that's kind of the gist of what's going on with me from my perspective.
Yeah, so it sounds from what you're describing like certain, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not shamanistic, it's not archetypal, although those do apply, but there's certain elemental qualities just seeping into your awareness from where you're situated, and also being open to them and being at a certain age, I guess, maybe where you're observing that, or maybe it's a combination, and that's filtering into the music.
That is very well said. That is pretty much exactly, if I could say it better than I did, that's how I would say it.
Cool. Well, yeah, I mean, because now musically, it sounds to me like from Juvenile Universe, like after that to now, everything since then. Like Juvenile Music Universe and Careful with Your Magic, there's not like as strong of a demarcation as I'm about to make it sound like there is, but those two to me are like sibling records.
Definitely.
They still have this element of a lot of the sort of heavy alt-ish, not maybe not heavy rock, but like there's for fans that have been following you since the beginning, there's elements to those that would really satisfy that, right? But it sounds expanded and updated. But then it seems like you've really embraced the new wave textures since then, and I'm curious about that. I mean, I know you've
Um,
been a fan of the Cars,
yeah,
forever.
yeah. I would say on Love Oblast, the last one, I was definitely really using synthesizers a lot. And I think that that was sort of like, you know, very influenced by just like what I hear on the radio, what I hear on like the university station and stuff. And then I come back and just sort of, it was just in the air. On this record, this on Animal Math, this is the first album I've written exclusively on the guitar since 1996.
Mm.
So like everything, from the reboot of like 2012, We Draw Lines, I would say it's like 70% written on keyboards, either piano or synthesizer. And then for this record, there's a real demarcation point of like, I really, here's the thing, I just got deeply into Siouxsie and the Banshees in the last year. Like I've always loved them. I had their records, not all of them, but then just really, really got into that in the last year. And 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 sort of fascinated by the guitar textures, which is interesting because I just finished like an oral biography and they had like revolving door guitar players. It was the bass player, Steve Severin, who was basically creating the musical vibe
Hmm.
for each song. And then they were kind of at the whim of like whoever was playing the guitar, and they had some really good ones in there, really good guitar players. So I was getting into that, and then I was about 2 or 3 songs or 4 songs in, and Paul Demore and I started talking again, just a bit more. He had done some overdubs on one of the songs, and he expressed interest in doing more. He was like, "Keep sending them." He was like, "I like this vibe," and then I sent him um, the second song on the record, "Swimming in the Same Fire," and he was just like, he was very um, adamant that this should sort of be the new direction. He was like, this is fun. This is like kind of good timing. And he's like, I feel like you sort of, you know, maybe you maybe kind of finished your last cycle, your last sort of aesthetic cycle. This is kind of the opening up of a new one. And so and then he did some incredible overdubs, and his wife Gildan from the band Fig, she did some vocals that were just like, those big shimmery background vocals that she does. And then I kind of had a vision of the record. It became kind of like, I'm going to follow through on this, because when I sit here and I go through I'll go through my Blink of the Star folder in Pro Tools, and I'll have at any given time maybe 30 or 35 ideas that I could just start working on that are already begun. And you get to a point of like, when you open one of them, it gives you a sync. It depends on the day, completely depends on the day. You open one song and you're like, it gives you a sinking feeling in your gut, because you're like, either it's unfinishable or it just seems like too much work or something. And then you open up another song and it gives you this feeling of, oh shit, this is going to be fun. And the songs that were giving me that feeling were these up-tempo, rhythms kind of based on floor toms. Like I was listening, I love Budgie, the drummer for Siouxsie. It's just like really, really made a mark on me as a musician. And the Creatures records too, that the two of them did together, I think are wonderful. And so I was just really ingesting that. And so it definitely came out in me wanting to, and I got a different guitar. I got a new guitar, and I just, any guitar you give me, I will fall in love with it and find sort of a slightly new way of playing it. Because they all have such, vastly different, just physical, mechanical characteristics. So this one particular one I got a hold of, I just fell in love with it and could do weird things with it that I couldn't do, and had a slightly more shimmery, brighter sound than I was used to. And that also informed like the musical direction. So once those kind of things culminated, then it was just like, okay, now I'm going to write a song that fits after the last song that I wrote. And it became a bit more like thematic. The writing became a bit more like, I knew what I had to do to finish it. I knew what kind of songs I wanted. And it was mostly up tempo, very much like the rhythms are like Christine by Siouxsie and the Banshees. That's like sort of the rhythmic archetype of this record, I think, be boiled down in that song.
So it sounds like Paul, that initial nudge from Paul is what a producer would have done in pre-production,
or an A&R guy.
Okay, to help you carve out, who also happened to be working on the music with you.
Yeah.
Because I imagine that's, I mean, I know what that's like to, you got all these unfinished, various states of being baked, things, and to carve out a record from that can sometimes be difficult in how they would or wouldn't fall together.
Mm-hmm.
I hear Paul in there. And I'm very curious because you said you reconnected. I know you and I are both huge fans of that Lusk record. That's one of my favorite albums ever, actually.
Me too.
And I know you had hinted or something that there was somebody you might be able to suggest to reissue it or something. At some point, I'm curious if there's anything you can say about that.
So I can. What I did was, so I got to see Paul this summer in July. Ministry came through Toronto, so I went down and we got to hang out for the evening, and it was amazing, really fun night, and amazing to see him. I had talked to him on the phone about a month earlier, and I gave him this whole pitch about Lusk. I was like, listen, it's not just people our age that record has stuck with them for, almost 30 years, and they still listen to it, and they're still turning other people onto it. But just look on YouTube comments. It's like there are younger people discovering that music, and it's sort of floating to the top. And I'm like, this is a really, really good moment for you to either, re-release, because it wasn't even on any sort of streaming platforms. Nope. So at very least, a couple of weeks ago, he got it onto streaming platforms, because there was some like really sort of low level legal questions that I had already kind of dealt with in dealing with your old catalog, major label stuff, and what you can use and what you can sell and all that kind of stuff. And Ken had sort of guided me through that when he was here last year. And so I sort of like told Paul what I had learned through Ken. We basically used Ken's lawyer. Ken paid his own lawyer, and then Paul and I used his advice in doing August Everywhere and Lusk online. And so at least we got that going. It's like out there, and it's alive again because it's on the streaming platforms. So I think you and I had a little bit to do with that.
I did not know that, and I'm so delighted. So I'm not to get too much into what I'm doing, but I'm writing a most unique albums of the 90s list, and that's close to the top of my list. I mean, I just adore that record so much.
Mm-hmm.
And now that it's out, I can even do a longer thing for Pop Matters on the record and why, like, you need to hear this,
Good.
So the thing is, back to what he did this time with you, the thing that was such a breath of fresh air with Lusk is that, Paul was so integral in shaping the sound of Tool. I would argue that as much as I like what Justin Chancellor does, I just thought the band was never the same once he left.
Yeah.
I thought they have always been missing something since then. And then when you see where his musical mind actually was, and what the kind of stuff he's more native to with Lusk, I'm hearing that on what he did on Animal Math. And I would just love for you to assess your thoughts on his artistry, his overall thing. Like, what are your impressions of his sound, his creativity, his art, where he's coming from, and what value you put on that?
Oh, I put the highest value on Paul's contributions and also his perspective. Like, you're right. In this era of, I'm not the only one sitting at home making records by themselves. There's this element of lack of a producer, and I would argue lack of A&R direction, which at its best was, I think, a beneficial thing to artists that were signed to labels back in the day. That sort of direction doesn't exist at all now. So I'm lucky enough that Paul was interested and felt a sense of like enough ownership over the stuff once I gave him free reign to add stuff that he could also suggest like arrangement changes. And so in effect, I for certain things, he kind of is the co-producer, and I guess that's the way that I fill that gap that's missing, the A&R direction and the producer direction. Because at a certain point with most of my songs, I kind of run out of ideas and I'm like, I know it's not baked yet. And I think the thing on this record that has coalesce is the process of when I let go and start sending it to my friends. And I sort of cherry pick, like Paul's perfect for one song. My friend Bob Wilcox is perfect for another song. Stella is great for another vocal. And I sort of farm out duties and then give them complete freedom. And then they send me back stuff. And then I sort of manipulate it according to how it fits in the song. And on this record, I've just very consciously realized that is completely important to my process now. There's no way I want to or could make great records completely by myself. I think it's absolutely essential. So Paul, having sort of like really liked the new direction of some of the songs, like a little bit more like, British new wave, early 80s guitar textures and stuff, and speedier tempos, because I have a tendency to really lay into like mid-tempo grooves. I can really do that till the end of time. So yeah, what Paul does amazingly well is like steps into a situation, assesses the whole thing, and then his taste and what his textures are just not what anyone else would do. I mean, it's really a Paul D'Amour thing. And I think like the more people like listen to the things that he's been involved with, there is like an overarching aesthetic quality to what he does. Like on Swimming in the Same Fire, he does these sort of chordal stabs on the chord changes in the chorus that he's not playing not even close to the root chord that's happening. And as a result, it opens up the chords harmonically into this way more sort of more I don't know, satisfying, complex sort of harmonic place. And then, in the vocal, it's almost like some of those interesting Andy Summers chords that play up against Sting's bass in a very interesting, almost atonal kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And so Paul just has great ear for those sort of things. He also, the other thing that he really added was he would make suggestions of, you need to have a moment of like high drama right here. And they would often be not where I would lay them. I would wait longer and then come in with a splash of drama. And the direction, that he would give me would not be that specific. He would just say a big moment of like drama, some sort of explosion or thunder. And sometimes I would just actually use I record thunder and put it in. So he has a great ear for keeping the listener's ear engaged throughout a song and adding these little spikes of energy that just they're sort of anomalous events, basically, is what he's really good at, are these anomalous events in the songs that maybe don't happen more than once. And just lends a lot of unpredictability and interest to the songs. From like, it just makes it so much more interesting once he lays guitars on, once he had laid guitars on some of these songs.
Wow. Okay. And you talked about when we were talking via email, you mentioned that now you're in a phase where it feels like you're putting together a band for each record, kind of. And you just talked about you don't think it would be it would really work to finish things completely on your own. I'm wondering, in the past, then you were doing more or less that, and getting people here and there, but like it wasn't like sort of opening it up to like a group interaction as much.
No, like every song on this record, there are contributors. And if I look back to, the records from maybe 10 years ago, I'm almost playing everything. So it's more colorful. It's just more interesting, less boring. And I get like a actual rush, when I get an email from Paul and he sends the file in and I hear it for the first time and it's like not contextualized, it's too loud and everything. And I just like, oh, that is a jolt of fun, in a process that is now decades old for me. So, that's part of the thing too, is like, how do you keep this fun? Because I see where it couldn't be, where it might not be fun at some point. But I think as long as like I have good pals like him that are willing to, lend their spirit and their aesthetic and their talents to these records, that it's endlessly fun for me. It still is right now anyway.
Yeah, and it allows your own ideas to hit you from a different angle that feels fresh, and they become different things which you haven't been able to really enjoy. And I imagine since the time where you worked with Ken on August Everywhere. Again, that's another, there's in my head, the Ben Folds 5 record. Sometimes I say August and Everything and Everywhere After or something like that, but it's August Everywhere.
Crows, isn't it?
What's that?
Isn't it Counting Crows?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Things are connecting. The synapses there's a lot of crossed wires here, but yeah. So even when you did have a quote unquote band with Kelly, and I think there still wasn't quite as much of that element. You still had a very strong compositional sense of bringing this to these players and fulfilling that. And now it sounds like you're finally opening up to people leaving their stamp on your ideas.
Yeah. And I think, it's almost like a long distance, it's a little bit Steely Dan-ish, where they would sort of choose who might deliver the goods best on a particular part and just kind of have this space open. So now, yeah, I leave spaces open now. I think that was the big shift in this record, is that I would just stop earlier and send it to Paul. And then there's more space. John Fields as well, he's a producer friend of mine. He played on almost every song on this record. Also, his additions are like very producerly. Again, a lot of times they're sound effects or just like chicka chicka chim, like a weird little Kate Bush drum machine sample or something. And that's his like producer ear that I'm borrowing again, and adding sort of like another little layer of just interest of things that I wouldn't think of. Like I don't think of like those little things as much as he does. He really, and also it's fun for him because I'm sending him things that are almost finished, and he likes the cherry on top stuff. he likes doing that. It's fun for him, and he'll just like improvise takes with a variety of sounds, and then I'll just kind of go through them and find little moments that add a little, spike of interest to the song. So yeah, this is the record where I really was like, this is the way forward. This is like the most interesting way to basically, to start the whole process over again in this room on this property for the fifth or sixth time.
Mm. And this allows you to be more spontaneous, you said, over email, or you're now embracing being more spontaneous, whereas my impression was that it was very exacting. You would keep chiseling away detail after detail after detail in that sort of stereotypical producer studio rat kind of mindset, and really, like, it would take a while for the songs to every detail to sit just right, whereas now you feel more comfortable.
Yeah, and the songs get finished quicker because they're approaching it in a different way than I would. So they're not, the songs feel finished more quickly once they add their stuff. There's less for me to do. There's less detailing. And, Paul and John are both great at, just like I said before, these like splashes, I would call them. These like sort of splashes of musical energy throughout the song that are just come from a different musical brain than me completely. Similar tastes, but just a different approach. And they're coming at the song from a different time in its creation. I was there when the actual fundamentals of the bass line and deciding how many kick drums in the measure there should be, all that sort of like early heavy lifting. They don't have to ever think about that. They sort of get at this almost built building, and they just kind of get to decide what colors or what type of windows to put on it. And it's it's fun because I like working like that. I wish more people would involve me at that point in a I typically get more hired for building things from the ground up, or just mixing, which I think is mixing to me, as far as like outside pursuits of outside of Blinker, is the most satisfying because I'm coming at it late and I can change things dramatically, even though things are in stone. The band finishes with it, and then there's this whole other life in mixing that begins.
But you're saying you would welcome people approaching you in the same capacity as what you asked Paul.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just like to add color splashes, because I would come at it from a different way than they would. So I just think it's a good way. If you're an artist that works kind of like I do, I would recommend it to anyone. It's a fun way to work.
It certainly helps you sort of rotate the soil a little bit, because you're not as precious. You can loosen up a little bit in that way and still be creative, but
it is
you're
so
not.
Fun. The loosening up thing. I almost put this in the press release because it's a funny story, but I once was leveled a devastating yet accurate and funny insult from Paul Westerberg. I did a mix for him about like 14 years ago or something, and I was just starting mixing. I really wasn't that great or whatever. And I may have I think I had to add some instruments, or I can't remember exactly. It was for a film soundtrack thing. Anyway, our mutual contact, who decided that it would be a good idea for me to work on this Paul Westerberg song, later told me Paul's reaction, because it was this very sort of uptight mix where I tried to take what Westerberg was doing. I guess this is an impulse that other producers who worked with him have had, and to, fucking narrow it down the middle a little bit, and just I'm I can hear a great song in here. It's just so loose and raggedy. You know what I mean? My impulse was to tighten it up. And the point of the song was not to be tightened up at all. So I just didn't get it. And so So they asked Paul what he thought of the mix, and he's like, yeah, dude needs to unbutton his top collar.
That's awesome. That's great.
So good. And so I think it was like near the end of when I was finishing up the record, and there was all this stuff in the news about the Tim re-release, and it sort of brought that story back to mind, and I was like, oh yeah, this record is sort of like my unbuttoning of the top collar a little bit.
That's hilarious. That's great.
Yeah.
That's worth just the story alone, you know?
Yeah.
That's so funny. So what happened with your mix of that song?
Discarded, and I think they were kind of going with his basement mixes or something. Like I can't remember how it all ended, but it ended up just being a lot more simple than what I was trying to do.
I mean, and the marriage of those two perspectives clearly can meet in the middle, like with Rick Ocasek and I forgot the other producer's name. The Guided by Voices records that are very produced. The name escapes me right now.
Well,
but
Rick produced the album.
He did.
Yeah.
And then they worked with someone else after. So you can find that that middle ground, but you do have to unbutton the top button. Now, what you would say to Paul, in all fairness, is, dude, put a shirt on.
That's what I felt at the time, but I totally appreciate that. His whole aesthetic is scribbling far outside the harmonic and in tune lines and in all that shit. It doesn't matter. It's about vibe and performance, and I get that now.
Yeah, I mean, I read in Tape Op magazine years ago. This was in the late 90s, early 2000s. I don't remember which producer it was who said he would have to get up in Paul's face and say, I need you to give everything you've got for this song in terms of performance. Mm-hmm. And he described the attitude that, Paul's attitude was like, well, I'm not going to give it to you. So those guys definitely had some sort of holding back of their own. They had some sort of self-containment thing where they wouldn't give everything they could, which I think is interesting. So, I mean, yes, it's cool. I think it sounds like his feedback was apt. Like if he was like a guidance counselor in like a recording school or something, that would have been hilarious.
So good, because it really did apply to other things as well. And it was such a dressing down, if I may, that I was like, that's like one of those good criticisms that cuts you at the time and sticks with you. And you can always reference back and say, am I going too far down the buttoned up collar route?
It's great that he could hear that too, that he could hear that it, like you're saying, it wasn't just your mixes, but just sort of where you were at the time. Yeah. That's really funny.
I love it.
That's great. It's too bad you couldn't like use that quote somehow,
I was thinking I was trying to weave it into the like bio press release thing, but I was like, it was such a detour.
Yeah. So you are more comfortable, more loose, more open. The music is more, it breathes. It's soaking in not just your surroundings, but also touches from people. And of course, you're working on a new batch of material as you have been each step of the way here. Every time I've checked in, and you're preparing for this sort of like post-harvest descent into cold weather, where you'll be spending much of your time in that room that we see you in. What would you say about the direction you're going in now with the next group of songs?
Well, this can change halfway through the record, and because I usually do kind of start with like a vision of what the record could be. And right now that I do have a vision of it, but it could change. Vision of it is basically in the way that like Juvenile Universe was sort of the sister album to Careful With Your Magic. This next one could be the sister album to this, but even more refined, perhaps even more sparse, and perhaps even a little spikier, and perhaps even a little less key, like basically kind of the way that this one is going, maybe even just like a little more narrow might be done for one record before my mood changes again. But yeah, that's what I feel like anyway. Like my favorite songs on the record are like that second one, Swimming in the Same Fire, the ones that are the first one that do kind of like, you know, have a bit of that sort of British goth aesthetic, just sort of in the hues of the recording. And then, you know, as soon as I sing on it, it just sounds like me again. So I can kind of be pretty explicit about musical influences and incorporating them, because as soon as I sing, it just sounds like me again. You know, like
there's definitely a
much
through line.
As much as I think things change, you know, I'll send them to like a longtime friend and they'll go like, sounds like Blinker the Star. I'm like, damn.
Well, but it is an ideal version of this, because the foundation underneath is changing quite a bit, but the overall sense of harmonic direction stays consistent. You can tell it's coming from the same source. And so the records all fit, even though you're reaching to different things for each one. It's not in a way that limits the variety. It's in a way that nicely grounds the variety.
I would say so.
So I just had a question, and before I forget, you mentioned Siouxsie and the Banshees. I was just thinking yesterday, I saw them at the first Lollapalooza and wish I had paid better attention.
Me too. Exactly the same experience. Yep.
They were a little reserved for where I was. I was 18, so I wasn't quite, especially on a day where you're getting pummeled by all these other bands.
By Butthole Surfers at 1 p.m. And then in my memory, Siouxsie maybe played at 5 or something.
I think it was dark when she played, if I'm not mistaken.
Were they right before Jane's?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So it was later.
It was the twilight. It was the daytime to nighttime slot, which is always the most magical one at an outdoor show, where you get to see the whole change.
Yeah.
And the lights are on, but then they hit you more once it gets dark. But I need to go back and look at footage of it or something and really get into her stuff.
Yeah, because I think like in our teenage minds at that time, if you were like experiencing, you know, that sort of first explosion of alternative music being popular, which is, I remember going to that thing. I was 17, and I remember thinking, I had no idea this many people were into this weird music that me and my 3 friends in my small town are into. Like, there they all were. And there was like, I remember being struck that there were people over 40 at the show that were like lifelong, like punks or goths. And they were there to see Siouxsie. And it was like, I was like, oh, this thing is like consolidating, you know? And I think Siouxsie in our heads was sort of from like seems like a short amount of time now, but back then, like the difference between 1990 and 1981 was so night and day in our heads.
Yes, because we were so young that seemed like ancient history.
Siouxsie and the Banshees seemed like ancient history. So I remember thinking, oh, this is like sort of like a more mannered type of band than I'm in the mood for right now. And that I was more in the mood for Butthole Surfers.
That's exactly what the issue was for me. And I bet you if I was at that show now, I'd be won over.
Yeah,
by it.
Me too.
You know, and also the anticipation for Jane's Addiction, who are one of my all-time favorite bands ever, and just and you know, at that point, I had the endurance to listen to several heavy bands, not the same exact type of heavy band, but I could sit for 7 or 8 bands in a day and take it all in. Um, but yeah, and The Cure is another band I've really started to dive into. It's funny because a friend of mine, we went to see Tears for Fears recently, which was an awesome show,
Yeah, they're
by the
great.
way. They were really, and it was really they really staked everything on their new material, and it was like, whoa, like we know what people have come for, and they're like, no, 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 and at first I was really taken aback, and then it won me over. They like converted me to their
Right.
new record just by being like, no, this is our shit. Like we're proud of, they even said we're proud of this, we worked on this for 7 years. So
That's great.
but so I went with a friend who's like super into The Cure, and he um there was a show in Dallas where he didn't get in, but he hung out in the alleyway and met a bunch of other fans. They did like a surprise club gig or something like that. And
Uh-huh.
then he had a bootleg of the show that he was playing in the car that sounded like you were listening from an alley. And I thought, isn't that great that you get to recapture your exact experience? It was really cool actually. It
Yeah.
was like muffled and had the like you felt like you were standing in an alley. So, but yeah, Budgie and Toll from The Cure have just done a record together.
They have a
Did you?
podcast, just learned.
Okay, and one of them, Toll, wrote a book that's also new,
The
and
history
so something like that. Yeah, yeah. So I'll pass along the info about the record because it's just right where you're in that zone.
Yeah,
I think it'll ring some bells for you.
amazing.
Um, I'm trying to think if there's anything I didn't cover. Listening to you talk about Paul and Ken, it's quite remarkable that, I don't want to go too far and compare it to like Laurel Canyon or something, that
Mm.
whole thing. Although you were in Laurel Canyon, weren't you?
I looked right in there. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Um, but it it really is remarkable that there was an artistic community among these different acts.
Hmm.
Blinker, Failure, Tool, Medicine, Melissa to some degree,
Hmm.
and there are people that I'm not including in there, but and the way that that's grown is really, in this like larger telling of music and alternative rock and everything that's sort of put under this big giant tent. There's
Hmm.
one corner of that you guys, all these art acts, represent that had more. It's nice to see what has sprouted from that tree. Let's put it that
Yeah,
way.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's still sprouting. It's, you know, and it really like it, God, when I think about just like what perfect timing it was, because like I got off the plane and, within a couple nights there was the party up at the house that my landlord threw because he was Tool's A&R guy and had signed Lusk to Zoo. So it was like everyone. And then I remember a week later, there was a party at Paul's and it was kind of the same gang. And I was like, oh shit, this is cool. Like these guys hang out together and are turning each other on to, like Richard Davies and the Moles and like Surf's Up, Beach Boys, and all that stuff that was kind of percolating um, back then. And I just remember thinking, geez, this actually is a gang that has sort of, placed sort of like their aesthetic stamp on LA and music in general. And LA is not often, you know, LA is sort of, it's so spread out and the scenes are so spread out that there's often not these sort of movements in LA is just so spread out and so diverse that it's interesting that kind of thing happened.
Yeah, it took a certain group of people that had connections outside of music too to kind of set the groundwork. for that.
Hmm.
Those Adam and Ken and people being into film, and for Ken, obviously music was not even something he was gonna seriously do.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
detail was like a hobby, which is quite incredible to think about.
I know. He's dabbling and it becomes failure.
But dabbling with a work ethic that I think set him apart from people. He said that even when they were in the sort of darkest point of making Fantastic Planet, he liked to work all day. He didn't he
Oh,
didn't
he loves
enjoy,
no, it's fun. He digs it. Yeah.
and he said he didn't enjoy chasing people. And the part of what happened, he told me a funny story. Part of what happened with the Replicants is that they didn't like the fact that he was so sort of on top of them and parental to work.
True. True. Yeah. They definitely wanted to party a bit more.
And so you also talked about Lollapalooza. I've been thinking about this. That was right before the. I mean, you could tell things were changing. There was the sense of this changing of the guard, or the something about to. And at that point, Jane's Addiction's already on Warner Brothers, and
Mhm.
it's like you're storming the castle, right? But I thought it was much more compelling in that moment than what it eventually became, where it became a more homogenous. Even the term alternative rock or alternative means something very different now than what it did in the glorious summer of 1991. I'm
Yeah,
just
it was
curious to
more.
get your thoughts on that, because you were a beneficiary of, once things had already changed, people looking for more of this to pump out into the culture.
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple really fruitful years where things were still like, as I perceive it, like colorful. Like that first Lollapalooza lineup sort of speaks to how colorful it was. Like Siouxsie and the Banshees, Butthole Surfers, Body Count, Janes. Um, and then yeah, it's sort of, I would say, like after Kurt's death, that that seems to be where things funneled into a more narrow, more sort of like macho rock thing, especially on the radio in the mainstream. And that the more colorful, and then Paul leaving Tool, like Paul staying in Tool would have ensured sort of a more colorful musical trajectory for them, a more Flaming Lips, Pink Floyd. There would be keyboards, you know what I mean? No quarter influenced. So Tool narrowed their vision. Alternative rock radio narrowed its vision, and but I think like from like 88 or something to like 93, I mean, there was just so many cool different sounding records. And yeah, we were kind of spoiled there for a few years. That was a real good little era.
And there was a lot of fruitful intersection between corporate and underground music that came with great results. And I think your point about the A&R component, I mean, I don't know, I haven't talked to too many people about that, but just basing it on your own experience, I think that's a really, really good point, that we got some really awesome records that came through that system that eventually got narrower, like you said, like closed down a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Michael Beinhorn really articulates this point really well too, about, and he's actually taken action. You can hire Michael Beinhorn to basically sort of A&R slash pre-produce slash oversee the production long distance of one of your songs. And so Filippo, my partner from the band Sheloom, he and we hired Michael Beinhorn for one song because he's kind of like a producer hero of ours, having worked on the Mew record and Soundgarden and Herbie Hancock. And so he sees that sort of missing element in a lot of records that are coming out, where that one extra layer of gentle prodding of care. I remember my A&R guy at DreamWorks, I would be up here sort of just writing songs for a prospective new record, and this package of 15 CDs would show up. It's like everything from, Velvet Underground to Loving Spoonful, Smashing Pumpkins, Tom Petty. And he would just be like, ingest these great records as you write.
Whoa.
And, it's just so helpful. And yeah, I always appreciated the direction that I got from A&R in my experience.
Wow. So he actually went and curated music for you to just absorb.
Yeah.
Just to water the soil.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep this in mind, keep these arrangements in mind. So yeah. And then, Beinhorn gets technical as well, because he's really into song construction.
Mm-hmm.
And he feels that that's also really sort of missing in today's artists. So he also will go right in and sort of like restructure your song if you haven't already gone too far, and sort of guide you. So that was fascinating to do that, because Filippo and I are both producers, and then to have this sort of like overseer producer kind of kick our asses was really fun. And I learned a lot. Just like, he hears things, my God, he hears elements in a song's production, or elements that could be there that achieve a goal that I hadn't even thought was a goal in putting a song together, like he'll focus on things, very, very tight little moments in a song. He'll be like, this little breath here is too boring, you need to put in this little, and his direction is like, he can put more information in one sentence. I remember making 3 specific mix moves that took me 20 minutes each from one of his sentences of direction. It was he would so densely pack information into a sentence that it would take me that long to unwind it. I would have it up. Oh, okay, I see what he's saying. And really high level stuff. So yeah, it's interesting that sort of element is missing, but he's like, you can hire me, I'll do that, because it's missing in today's music. So good for him.
My guess is that that'll eventually come back, is that people will sort of innately find themselves craving something, like, I hope anyway, fingers crossed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you're an example then.
Yeah.
Right. He's also, I'm glad you reminded me, because his posts are really compelling too. He's a really compelling culture commentator as well. And
yeah,
I had no idea until.
He's a great brain and a great thinker. And at the end of the process, we had like a Zoom, me, Filippo, and Michael, and it just like he was like Filippo and I had to go. He was like, guys, I'm not doing anything. I can just keep talking. This is the most fun I've had in weeks. This is great. You guys are so fun. He's like, I wish you were here in Victoria. We'd go to the pub and just talk all afternoon. And I was like, what a cool guy.
Yeah. That sounds like it. Yeah. That sounds great. I remember last time you telling me how much you felt at home in LA, and you were talking about the adjustment to being back in Pembroke then, and that was 3 years ago. And you were talking about that earlier. It's interesting because the people I know from the Northeast who've moved to that part of the country have complained of the overabundance of sun and the lack of a seasonal punctuation. But it's interesting to hear you have to sort of make sure you properly ration your intake of sunlight.
Yes. Priorities. They shift.
And I mean, I know you told me last time you were always doing things in the music store that your parents owned, and that was right by that building was the one where the Trans-Canada Highway used to go right behind it or something, right?
Yeah, it was so vibrant and yeah, there was always like this little downtown core of like just rows of parked cars, that would just speak to the liveliness of downtown back then. It's kind of almost gone back to that as like, here, like other towns, the malls are getting gutted now. Like no one goes to the malls anymore. And if you're lucky, your little downtown core has had some sort of rejuvenation, which has happened here. So I kind of like that, but it's weird going to the malls now because they feel like these you've seen these videos on YouTube where people will find some old like abandoned plaza or mall or condemned underground tunnels between old malls or something, and they'll just sort of walk around these bizarre places. And like I feel like the small town malls are starting to almost feel like that, this sort of ghostly, weird feeling.
Yeah, they look like ruins.
Yeah, and they're becoming antiques, which is very odd, interesting.
And eerie too. And luckily we're getting something back in return for what those that building approach depleted. But it's amazing because I find myself, when I worked in a suburb that was right across the street from a mall back in the mid 90s when I was getting high all the time, listening to Magnified, plastering my brain with that music. And I would have complained at the time, this sucks. Like, this is lifeless. This is horrible walking through here. There's no sidewalk. It's just like the worst. I feel drained being here. And yet, in an odd way, I have a sense of wistfulness about it too.
Isn't it funny? Yeah.
It really is. It
Yeah.
really, really is.
Mhm.
You talked about Tool narrowing down, and I've recorded a video where I'm talking about how when I first discovered that band, I really thought they were going to leave a footprint on par with like Led Zeppelin. Maybe not necessarily as popular, but in terms of exploration.
Felt like that.
You had this sense that the creative world was the oyster of this band and they could do so much. And it's interesting you talked about Flaming Lips and things like that. And then they just settled into this rut basically, and it's like, wow, like the even the tones are the same. And it's like you were talking about the lack of A&R. I just wish a band like that would have a producer that would have the nerve to say, you know what, actually, let's unplug the fucking guitar.
Yeah.
And I want you guys to go get field recordings, and I want you to build something out of field recordings and try a different instrument completely, like, or I'd like you to score this film.
Mhm.
Like something just to take them out of their established vocabulary, because it's so self-referential at this point. It's really, really.
I would love for them to have a very strong-willed Michael Beinhorn. Can you imagine Michael Beinhorn producing Tool? Just all the things that Paul adds to my stuff. I'm just like, damn, they really had the guy, the guy within the band that brought these like splashes of personality and mystery and intrigue and drama to the music that and color that Beinhorn and Paul producing. It would be.
I was gonna say, why Paul producing would be
Paul
interesting too. Would be. I mean, I just don't understand how that's happened. And I've enjoyed some of their music, but it's like, man, I've said this on my own video, but I'm not gonna put this on you. You watch that. I don't know if you've seen that drum perspective clip of Danny playing the song Neuma, which is a new song, and this was right before the pandemic. And it's just like his manual dexterity is like so outstanding. You're like, God damn, this guy can do so much.
Mm-hmm.
But that tone, that sort of tabla like Indian percussion tone, he was first doing that in 96.
Mm-hmm.
And Justin's that chorusy kind of bass tone, it's like the exact. And I don't think they would be open to, the band is an institution at this point. It doesn't, from their manager's perspective, they don't need to do anything.
Yeah.
Right? They're not
Yeah.
in the music industry where they're sort of fighting to keep climbing, where a label could say, hey, we're going to pair you with this producer. What do you think of this? Try something new, where they would feel the need to take this chance and go out on a limb. I don't think a band at this stage would do that. And it's really, really unfortunate, because I think our generation got robbed of what could have been a 10-album incredible body of work. I've always described the magic that band had at the beginning. I have never heard a band ever in any other style of music play where it's like there's this swaying push and pull between all the instruments, and they weren't just hitting on a beat. It was like they would sway on either side of it. I always felt that Danny Carey played ahead of the beat, yet dragged the band back at the same time, which is an extraordinary quality. And I remember telling him that, and he acted like I was speaking Greek to him, which was cool, which I thought was cool. I thought that was great, because he didn't even, it's innate. He doesn't even realize it's
actual. Yeah. And listen to his drumming on, I love his drumming on, does he play on the Hotel Family Affair on the Lusk thing? So great. It's like, yeah, I think it's that one. And it's like a master class in like hi-hat playing. Yeah, it's that song. He's on that one. It's incredible. It was done on, they didn't have like, for the Lusk album, they didn't have the best drum room and setup. And so it's weird because it doesn't have like that big Tool drum sound. It's a more contained sort of like little new wave drum set, but it's Danny playing, on this sort of new wave song. It's so cool if you're just listening to it from knowing that it's Danny.
Yeah, that's really interesting perspective. And it's also, I don't know what happened in the mid-90s where all of a sudden, because in the 70s bands would put out 2 records a year, which was maybe too much.
Mm-hmm.
And they were on a brutal, punishing touring schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And recording got cheaper, and yet people started taking longer and longer. Maybe that's why. Maybe because they had more discretion, power over decisions.
Yeah.
Started taking longer and longer and longer and longer. I remember Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick. I interviewed him once, and he said that I started to ask him a question about the mixes on In Color and Heaven Tonight, and he immediately goes, too wimpy. And he said, you have to understand, it's a shotgun marriage. He said, we would be on tour. They'd send us into the studio, then send us back on tour. They would mail us tapes and say, how do you like the mixes? And we'd say, well, we want to change this. And they'd go, no, you like them. That was, they put the record out.
Same thing of Black Sabbath when they couldn't fix the mixes of Born Again, and because they were already on tour. Not only that, but the album cover was done without their, and it's like this famously ugly album cover. They were like, too bad, boys, that's the way Smell the Glove.
Yes, Ian Gillan has a great quote. He said, when I saw the cover, I wanted to puke, and then he said, and then when I heard it, I wanted to puke again. That's great. But I mean, something happened right around late 90s, 2000s when recording gear starts to get more affordable. You think people are going to put more music out, and the opposite happened.
Yeah, because people are tinkering away longer and longer and longer and obsessing because they're sitting at home and not paying the money to be in a studio where you have to make decisions and finalize and then move on. So I actually try to, as much as I possibly can, try to impose deadlines on myself as if there were a massive audience and a record company breathing down my neck, I try to behave like that, even though it's an artifice. But it just helps finish things, which I think is like the thing that a lot of artists working at home now find the most difficult to deal with, is when is it finished?
Well, on that note, it sounds like you're very much in a groove. Sounds like you've had that syndrome before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you've
through it.
Yeah. Well, listen, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you. I'll
Likewise.
shoot you obviously the link when this is up, and I scheduled an email to send at 2:30 to ask you to send Rock and Roll Tapes Volume 1. Like how much of a span?
Oh, I think 97 to 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have to look again.
That gives me an idea.
17 songs on it.
Okay. And who's that on the cover?
I'm not sure. My art guy, Vic Malang, found that picture, and I was like, "Can we use it?" He's like, "No, it's all cleared. Everything's cool." I was like, "Yeah, kind of looks like me when I was that age."
Okay. So yeah, because that's what I was wondering. So it doesn't look like you, but I wasn't sure if it was you
I
or
think
one
it's
of your friends or something.
Approximation of my youthful spirit of like, how into records I was as a kid. It's funny. I don't know if you're on TikTok, but I found a video today of me in 1984 lip syncing to Hard Habit to Break by Chicago. And
so how did that end up on TikTok?
I posted it today.
Oh, okay. You found the video and then, okay.
Yeah. It's pretty outrageous performance with my friends sort of pummeling me as I'm trying to sing this song that was so dear to my heart.
I'll check it out. I'll follow you. I haven't been very active on TikTok, but I have to now doing this. So, and it'll be fun because you can post songs legally of people from their pool of music. And, whenever I get a box set or something, I can play a tune from it and show, a little clip. So it's fun.
It's fun.
So yeah,
right,
real pleasure.
And some annotation. All right.
Yes. And I will certainly be in touch. Pleasure. Happy autumn. And
dude, you too.
Thank you. Take care. We'll talk to you soon. Yep. Bye-bye.
Awesome. Later.